Let's live well together. Let's spend it yesterday when you were alone.
We are going to rename our YouTube channel, Let's Live Well Together, and install fermentation-related contents in a series first. From now on, we will hear the details of the fermentation-related series from Professor Kim Yong-yeon's explanation. In terms of the introduction of fermentation as the first video, first, please explain the definition and concept of fermentation in an easy-to-understand manner.
I think fermentation will be defined in three aspects. One is, the substance we're trying to ferment is called the fermentation substrate. The process by which these substrates decompose small can be described as fermentation. Another thing we need in the process of fermentation is microorganisms. The process by which these microorganisms increase and the metabolic processes of these microorganisms accumulate can also be described as fermentation. I think we can express fermentation from a person's point of view. So when people use the expression fermentation, we use the expression fermentation when a substance is changed by a microorganism to help humans. So fermentation can be understood in terms of substrate, microorganisms, and humans. In general, microorganisms are involved in some of the substances that we want to ferment, and they break them down into small pieces. Microorganisms create metabolites. You can think of those metabolites as fermentation when they are beneficial to humans.
Listening to Professor Kim's explanation, I understand the concept of fermentation a little. However, it is not easy for ordinary people who lack expertise in fermentation to accurately explain the difference between fermentation and decay. So please explain the difference between fermentation and decay in an easy-to-understand manner.
Throughout the entire process of substrates being broken down by microorganisms, when it's done in a natural state, we just call it microbial decomposition. But from a person's point of view, when substances that come in like that protect a person's health or are used as nutrients, we use the expression fermentation. That's why we use the expression fermentation for all things like kimchi, soybean paste, and red pepper paste. Then, toxic or harmful microorganisms in the substances created in this way decompose, rot, causing damage to the human body. The part that makes poison like this can be regarded as decomposition.
Some people seem to misunderstand this as fermentation when containing extracts such as omega and plum syrup. Please explain the difference between fermentation and syrup in an easy-to-understand manner.
The difference between fermentation and syrup is distinguished by the difference between whether microorganisms are involved or not. For example, fermentation is determined by sugar or salt as the concentration at which microorganisms thrive. Next, oxygen and temperature are artificially controlled to obtain the substances we want. Syrup is a technique that preserves food or substances. So, if you put about 50% of the sugar so that the microorganisms can't grow, or you put the raw material and sugar in half, and you just put it away, and you close it tightly, the microorganisms can't grow. In this state, the liquid or raw material in which the substance is preserved can be expressed as syrup.
Then, can't we convert what we already put in syrup to fermentation?
Most people misunderstand the mixture of half and half of the substrate and sugar as fermentation, but this is clearly an error. What you can do with syrup is you have the conditions for microorganisms to grow. The condition is simply that if you put about 25% of the whole syrup in plain water, the sugar concentration goes below 40%, making it a condition for microorganisms to grow. After that, you have to inoculate microorganisms as starter. After microbiological inoculation, after that you set the right temperature and supply oxygen. Through these tasks, microorganisms grow well. If you help microbes to metabolize, syrup can be turned into fermentation at any time.
Next, let's expand the scope of fermentation. I think it can be divided into fermentation of natural ecosystems and fermentation in the human body. Please explain these two forms of fermentation in an easy-to-understand manner as well.
The fermentation that occurs in the human body is called digestion. Digestion refers to the process of eating food, dividing it into small pieces, and absorbing it. Microorganisms called E. coli in the intestine and food that enters the intestine are decomposed through fermentation at 36.5 degrees Celsius, and metabolites are produced by microorganisms. When we eat food, we simply think about the nutrients in the food. There are not only nutrients in food, but there are also metabolites released by microorganisms due to the action of microorganisms. Antimicrobial substances or hormones released by microorganisms while eating the food, it's done in digestion in the human body. Digestion in the human body, or fermentation, has a symbiotic relationship with humans, and when genetically networked microorganisms are helpful to humans, fermentation, or digestion, can be expressed in the intestine. Even in its natural state, the decomposition of matter takes place. If you look at the decomposition of this material, for example, compost is also a concept of fermentation. The spoilage bacteria work here as well as the general decomposition bacteria. So what happens in nature is that fermentation and decay coexist. Or you can think of all of those actions as fermentation in nature, where substances are digested into small units in this coexistence of fermentation or decay.
So, one more thing to think about is that if we eat food, we're going to eat microorganisms with it. If you have diarrhea, is it because spoilage bacteria came in?
Microorganisms can enter the human body at any time through food or contaminated water. In that case, the very low pH hydrochloric acid kills the bacteria. When you eat food, the spoilage bacteria are not killed by stomach acid, but are transferred to the small or large intestine. Under those conditions, when spoilage bacteria live well, it becomes a pathogen, it causes diarrhea, and it causes disease. For example, let's say I ate a plant called shepherd's purse. No matter how clean they are, there are 5 or 6 kinds of microorganisms living there. When such a microorganism enters, the microorganism and the human body's genes have genes that are shared with each other. What it means is that when these microorganisms enter the human body and decompose, they make substances that are beneficial to the human body and that can be used by the human body. So microorganisms may not be beneficial or beneficial to the human body, and the human body may not be able to defend against such microorganisms. When we eat food, we need to clean it, sterilize it, boil it, and eat it. If we take the method of fermentation by selecting only microorganisms that are not harmful to the human body and decomposing and eating food, these fermented foods are never harmful to the body.
So far, we've looked at the overall contents of fermentation, such as the concept of fermentation, so please explain why fermentation is important to us.
Fermentation is the starting point for life activities. There are 2 parts for a living thing to live: the work of bringing energy through food and the absorption of defense substances in that food. The moment we assume that no fermentation takes place, none of the food we eat is digested, and we block our intestines and die. So fermentation is absolutely necessary to maintain the life of the human body, and fermentation of food is the process of obtaining the substances necessary for life. Without fermentation, life activities are impossible.
Finally, since human beings have been eating since their appearance in this world, what efforts have humans made in terms of human history to maintain their health when eating food?
There are many processes in human history that increase the rate of digestion and absorption of the human body. Humans didn't cook food at first. When humans eat uncooked food, exposure to harmful bacteria or toxic substances would have shortened their lifespan and made them unhealthy. However, as humans use fire, proteins are broken down by fire, which facilitates digestion and absorption. Germs in the food died, and digestive absorption increased. However, although it is free from microorganisms and has increased digestion and absorption, there is a disadvantage. The human body also needs substances that are kept at low temperatures. But when you heat food, There are side effects of denaturing the proteins of these substances or destroying the functional substances. That's why humans became to make and eat alcohol and fermented foods while settling down. On the one hand, it is a food that is heated and boiled at high temperatures, which increases the absorption rate of that food, and on the other hand, it is possible to absorb low-temperature substances by fermenting at low temperatures. Through these two food intake methods, human life expectancy and health have been maintained. But now, most foods are boiled with heat. Because there are very few of these foods that are made at low temperatures, the current state of food is interfering with people's health and longevity.
So far, we've learned what's in the introduction of fermentation through Professor Kim Yong-yeon's explanation. In the future, we will continue to install videos related to fermentation in Korean and English on YouTube in the form of a series. We hope that domestic and foreign viewers interested in fermentation will love our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.